All right. Thank you, Megan. Well, good afternoon. First and foremost, welcome. Thanks for joining us today and sharing some of your time for our America 250 event. My name is Brennan Dolan. I'm the Cultural Resource Team Lead and Tribal Liaison at the Iowa Department of Transportation. It's kind of hard to believe, but we put over 1,400 miles on our road trip series since we started in January. For those of you who are local to Ames, it's kind of nice to have a chip shot. I know I appreciated that. But our 5 stops to date, we've had excellent attendance on, and that's awesome. The whole point of us envisioning this road trip was to engage with local communities, and that's been a ton of fun. Before I launch into some comments about America 250, there's some acknowledgments I want to extend. Folks have been working behind the scenes to make these events happen, and I want to make sure that they know how much we appreciate them. So my counterpart, Emily Whaley, with our local systems bureau, who's done some awesome work helping me plan. Debbie McClung, Christina Anderson, Jenny Butcher with our director's office that just do such a great job behind the scenes. We couldn't have done it without them. Prairie Rivers today, Jeannie Howe is going to help do some introductions along with Shelley Orngard. And then Megan Klein-Hewitt with Ames Public Library really helped us pull all of this off. So all of you, please know you have our appreciation. Planning for the America 250 events at the state level began in early 2024. So to get to today when we're actually hosting events is really exciting. This presentation is sponsored by the Iowa Department of Transportation in honor of the semi-quincentennial anniversary of the United States of America, often referred to as America 250. This year-long celebration focuses on 5 thematic topics. Those are unfinished revolutions, the power of place, we the people, doing history, and American experiment. And you'll kind of see a number of those themes woven into today's presentations. So if this is your first event or if you've been to all 5, I encourage you to continue to soak these up. The official master calendar for America 250 in the state of Iowa is on the governor's website. So check that out. As we snowball toward the 4th of July, you're going to see more and more and more of events. So with that said, I'm going to introduce Jeannie, who's going to connect us to our speakers today. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jeannie Howe, and I am the Lincoln Highway Heritage Byway Coordinator. As you know, the state has the 14 byways, and I want to thank the DOT for doing this. This is great. I'm also going to give myself a little shout out. There's some handouts in the back on the Lincoln Highway, and we do have some more 250 events planned along the Lincoln Highway. Just follow our Facebook page, and you'll see the one I've been doing since January 1st, which is 250 stops in 250 days. So with that, we'll get to business. Our first speaker is Bill Whittaker. He is Associate Director of the Office of the State Archaeologist at the University of Iowa. He is editor and co-author of Frontier Forts of Iowa and Archaeological Guide to Iowa. He's published extensively on Iowa archaeology and history in regional and national journals, served as editor of the Journal of the Iowa Archaeological Society for 10 years, and he drinks too much coffee for his own good, which he's already had one here today. So welcome, Bill.
Well, thank you. I hope my caffeine to blood ratio is at the proper level so I can have a nice smooth talk. This was a really cool project that began over a dozen years ago in which we were setting out to try to figure out what are the oldest surviving roads in northern Iowa. And the basis of this is the General Land Office between the 1830s and 1860s mapped all of Iowa so that they could let people settle in it and make sense of the township range and section of where everything is. And while they're doing this, they mapped hundreds of trails that were already in existence, even in areas which were not settled by Europeans or Americans at that time. So what's going on with this? So the main part of the project was to document what roads still survive that appear to match these GLO trails, where there are towns that are like kind of built at a weird angle as if they are correlated to the old roadways and they aren't on the cardinal directions. Farmsteads that are in the middle of sections that once you figure out where the Agilo Trail was, you realize, oh, that farmstead was actually built on Agilo Trail, and it's not built on the current township section. So that was the main part of it. A fun side branch of this effort was to figure out, well, can we determine who actually built these trails that were mapped before, that were there before when the General Land Office appeared. We've always known that there have been ancient trails in Iowa. One of the most famous one is the Chemin des Voyageurs, which ran across northern Iowa from in the upper right-hand corner of the Wisconsin River, all the way across to the village of the Iowa Patoué, which is the Iowa Great Lakes area, then all the way to a large village which is occupied by the Omaha, and the Iowa, which is now the Blood Run site. Other sites on here are the Octotata, which is the Oto, the Kansas tribe. The upper Iowa River is called the River of the Kickapoo, even though the Kickapoo did not have a very strong presence in Iowa at the time. Here's a few decades later, and you notice that the Chemin des Voyageurs kind of is still mapped from the mouth of the Kickapoo up to the Great Lakes, but it's been truncated, stops at the Des Moines River. And then a different trail appears from the mouth of the Wisconsin going across the Missouri. So these trails seem to be, from these early things, they seem to be very fluctuating and ongoing. Obviously they were used by early traders, primarily of furs, but also in eastern Iowa of lead. Native Americans recognized their trail system, and some of the earliest maps we have made by Native Americans really show Iowa as being crisscrossed by trails and roads. This is a famous 1837 map made by an Iowa Indian named No Heart to confirm their claims over Iowa in a treaty, and it shows the. Let's see if I have a laser here. I'm afraid to touch buttons, but anyway, this is the Mississippi River. Here is the Missouri River. Here's the Des Moines. Here's the Rock River, and here is the state of Iowa. And these are different villages that they traveled around to get to. And so this represents their routes of travel and their movement across the landscape from village to village. Although they're meant to represent movement of people, but they had to have followed some sort of trail system. So there's little hints of it that were there even before the General Land Office. Here's another hint: is that the U.S. military, when they were, for example, when they left Fort Crawford, which is in Prairie du Chien, Wisconsin, and went up the Mississippi Bluffs into Iowa, along the Marching Bears Mountain Group, they had a trail which was later called the Old Fort Road, where the soldiers would actually march up the bluff, march around the Marching Bears, and this was in the earliest map made of this mountain group by T.H. Lewis in 1885. And even in north central Iowa, Fort Dodge, William Williams mapped, the troops had brought in material and huge amounts of lumber and stonework and a whole mill system from eastern Iowa to the center of the state. So they clearly had to have been following trails. And of course, we have the settlers and immigrants who traveled across the street to go further places west. So there are plenty of things that can be causing the trail systems. But I wanted to figure out, well, can archaeology help to figure out what's actually going on? Do archaeological sites, if you break them down by time period, is there a correlation with their proximity to these sites? So between the 1830s and 1860s, Iowa was mapped very systematically by numerous teams of surveyors who went around all four quarters, all four sides of every square mile of the state of Iowa, mapped it in. They would map sometimes when they crossed a trail, not always. Trails start and stop in the middle of nowhere. They would map where they would saw landmarks, they would map bluffs, they would map creeks and rivers. So it really started the earliest view of what was actually in Iowa at the time of settlement. And as you can see, it progressed from east to west, as you might imagine, and the northern half of the state was mapped much later than the southeast part of the state. And so hundreds of miles of trails were mapped by the General Land Office between 1833 and 1861. Here are the trails. If you look at the previous slide, you can see that probably in the southeast part of the state and the center part of the state, this is because it's already being settled by American settlers. So a lot of these roads are leading to cities that are starting to form, cities that already exist and are ongoing. But in the northern part of the state, you have less of that going on. Here's an example of how trails are mapped on the General Land Office. Like here we have like going across a road to Decorah, and they sort of crisscross all over the eastern part of Howard. This is eastern Howard County. And you have people, like you see Johnson's Farmstead, Cotterells, Harlaws on the far right side. And it appears that people are building farmsteads along existing trails rather than leading a trail to a farmstead, because the trails go right by them and don't stop at them. Some of the earliest explanations for all these trails were pretty racist. One was that and this was really a very common view was that buffalo caused these trails, that buffaloes are just walking around the landscape, and because they're big and lumbering and they can kind of clear the way, and then Indians just follow these things, and Indians were, in their view, weren't smart enough to make their own trails, and therefore these are just buffalo trails. They've been there forever, and it's just that, it wasn't until white people came along that they would actually make a real sensible trail system. On the face of it, doesn't make much sense because a bison doesn't have the same needs for trails as humans do. Bison want to get from one pasture to another. They want to get from one watering hole to another. They have kind of ranges where they prefer to do mating. They have ranges where they prefer to winter. And these do not correspond to human needs. Humans, for example, bison don't like to be in the bottomlands of rivers because it's very difficult for them to move around. It doesn't have the type of food that they like to eat. But Native Americans like to be in bottomlands and in terraces. And so their trail system would probably, include a lot of bottomland and terrace areas, whereas buffalo would tend to stick to the upland. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense that Native Americans are just following bison. But that was the prevailing view in the 19th century. So if you're going to start with the assumption that humans made the trails, maybe archaeological sites can infer upon this. So the project area includes the northern 4 tiers of counties of Iowa, and there's 40,000 archaeological sites recorded in Iowa. And do these sites correspond to the locations of trails? And can we infer anything about the proximity of archaeological sites to trails to determine if people were using these trails or not? And does it change over time? And the main reason we picked northern Iowa is because, unlike most of Iowa, the northern tiers of Iowa were actually not settled when they were mapped. So when you see a trail, it's more likely to have been something that was not produced by settlers. So again, here is all the trails that were mapped within our survey area. And so there's over 2,000 kilometers of geomap trails in the study area, which is about 20% of the 11,000 mapped in the whole state. There are 7,200 sites recorded in there, about 30% of the sites in Iowa. I had to make a boundary because when they mapped the General Land Office map things, they just mapped the perimeters of these 1 mile sections. They kind of would sketch the interior of the section, so you could have up to a half of a mile of error of anything that they're mapping because they're just kind of walking the perimeter. And so I said, well, okay, let's make a 1 kilometer buffer around these sites so that we can include a sample of sites that are close to trails and compare them with a sample that are not close to trails. So we had 2 groups. One, a random selection of 500 sites that are within a kilometer of the trails, and a random selection of 500 sites from the whole area as a whole. So there should be absolutely no difference between the two if there is no correlation between trails and not trails. So there was actually 96 sites, just by the randomness actually overlapped with them. So the total, the actual total is 904. And this was actually stopped there because it's a statistically meaningful sample of things. So then I had all these sites, and I had to painstakingly go through all the sites and try to figure out what time period they were occupied. So I'd go through all the site forms. I would look at these reports. Occasionally, I would look at some of the artifacts to try to figure out what time period they were actually occupied. And here is our study area and some of the archaeological sites. And you can see the red dots are archaeological sites. And so the control areas, the areas outside of the green areas, the areas within the green are archaeological sites within or near the trails. Here is our area in Howard County, which is, because there's so many trails, it's really inundated by archaeological sites. So I broke them down by the time period, archaic woodland, late prehistoric, protohistoric, early historic European. These are the main time periods that I was able to winnow out of the archaeological records. And here is the results. So the main thing to look at is the number of sites that are recorded within the control area, and the main sites recorded within the GLO trails or close to the GLO trails. The next row is the control sample of all the sites in the area. And these numbers should be, if it's completely random and the trails are not influencing anything, they should be very close to each other. And you can see that, for example, in the archaic and Paleo-Indian sites, which are like the really oldest stuff. These are stuff that are more than 3,000 years old. They're pretty close, and in fact, their probability is not that great. And woodland sites as well, you're not looking at a very high probability, and 50 and 50, the numbers are exactly the same. This is what you'd expect if there's absolutely no correlation between the presence or absence of a trail nearby. As you get farther down into history, into the late prehistoric period, which is going to be within the last 1,000 years or so, you starting to see very high statistical significance of sites recorded near GLO trails. And once you get to the early historic Indian, you're kind of getting off the charts. You have 21 sites are within a kilometer of the GLO trails, but only 4 are outside of the area. So they're very highly correlated with the sites. And this continues in the early historic Europeans. The earliest settlers are building sites along these trails, but they might also be building these trails. So it does appear that there is a strong correlation between archaeological sites and the presence or absence of them being near GLO trails. And this seems to be the strongest in the early historic Indian period and the earliest historic European period. But as you can kind of tell from this, there is the early historic Indian sites are so low in number that they might be kind of, pushing a little bit more on the data than they should be. And we need to do some sort of control for the early historic Europeans, because all the early historic Europeans, there's so many more of them that although they might have a lower propensity for being near sites, they might be sort of flooding the system. So here's a rough chart over time from the archaic to the modern period. If there's absolutely no correlation between sites near the GLO trails and away from GLO trails, their values should be 100% or close to 100%, meaning that there are equal numbers of them. And you can see that really spikes in the early historic Indian period. So this gives kind of the false impression that early historic Native Americans built the GLO trails. But as you recall from the last slide, there's a lot more early historic European sites in general. So yeah, it seems like Native Americans built most of the trails, but you need to control for the volume, for the sheer number of historic European sites. So I decided to normalize the data based upon the historic GLO trails so that, things are brought down as if, basically I'm trying to reduce the exaggeration of the importance of the handful of historic Native American sites and to get a better sense of what's going on with the sites in general, especially the early historic European sites. So here we are standardizing the normalizing for the early historic Native American sites, bringing the other values into so that they reflect and they're not overly influencing each other. And then you get a different reaction because there's so many more early historic European sites, it really spikes on them, their association with them. And early historic Indians are less prevalent, and late prehistoric spikes up as well. So this kind of pushes things a little bit later in there. And this also correlates with the probability. You know, when you look at the earlier statistical things, the tightest statistical probability is with the early historic Europeans. The second is with the early historic Indians. And then as you go back in time, the probability becomes less. So, if you were to take like these raw numbers, you could argue that of the 2,000 kilometers of geolo trails, you know, uh, early historic Europeans made most of them, the late prehistoric people made less. And as you go up farther back in time, uh, early historic Indians made even less. But this is kind of skewed because of the types of artifacts that are associated with sites. Early historic European sites tend to be easy to find because they have so much garbage sprayed out from them. They have broken ceramics, they have bricks, they have all building supplies, they have cut stone, they have metal everywhere. They're very easy to find. Whereas early historic Native American sites are hard to find because one, they're not making stone tools anymore. Two, they're not making their native ceramics anymore. They're using often brass kettles. They're using European guns. They're using European blades and knives, which really don't wear out. And where they do wear out, they can get recycled. And if they're lost, they're very hard to see. So you have this bias in the archaeological record against the early historic Native American stuff. So I think it's kind of underestimating Native American sites, especially the early historic sites. So yeah, it's basically your early Europeans can kind of overwhelm the archaeological record because their sites are just so easy to find and they're everywhere and they're less likely to be buried. But this really does prove that it wasn't bison building these things, because if bison were just building it, you know, you'd expect to find a strong correlation amongst all time periods with these trails. But in fact, as you go farther back, there's basically no correlation. They're not living anywhere. They're not any more likely to be near the trail as they are to be away from the trail, which runs counter to the idea that bison are making. What a more appropriate thing to look at would be that humans are building these trails. They're changing them over time as their needs change, as they utilize different resources, and the trails are kind of keeping up with them. And the trails are disappearing and coming and going slowly, being used over time. And when Europeans came to the area and settled the area, they were using these trails to begin with, and they're depositing a lot of sites along these trails until, you know, the General Land Office comes, squares it all out, and you start seeing the 1 meter square grid that you have today. So topography is not as important as human needs for the location of things. Trails moved over time as humans changed resource strategies, and bison did not build the trails. Human beings did. So yeah, thank you all, and I hope you enjoyed the little preview of the earliest highway systems in Iowa and who may have made them.
Bill, I'm a fan of Oak Island. I think you could teach them a little something there. Thank you. Our next presenter is Brennan Dolan, your very own. He serves as the Cultural Resources Team Leader and Tribal Liaison for the Location and Environment Bureau at the Iowa DOT. He's been with the DOT for 15 years and previously worked for Iowa SHPO, the National Park Service, and in the private sector. When not at work, you can find him hanging out with his family, paddling down a river, or with a fishing rod in his hand. Hope that's a real fish.
I don't have any plans to fish this weekend. I wish I did.
There's Brandon.
Thanks, Jenny. Okay, so the heart of this talk is April 13th, 1904. Take the drama out for you right as I kick off, okay? As a student of history, one of the really fun things to do in dissecting an event like the passage of the bill that became the Iowa Highway Commission, this is House File 371 for legislative historians. One of the fun things to do is to tease out some of the places, the people, some of the inner relationships and the connectivity that encircle that event. So ultimately, that's the picture that I'm painting for you today with my presentation. Early history of the Iowa Highway Commission brought to us via House File 371 in 1904. Again, focus that early 1904 period. You can't talk about the Iowa Highway Commission and its roots without Anson Marston. I'll spend a little bit of time talking about the, kind of the pre-Highway Commission era, and then I'll focus on the first 5 years. What did the work that the Highway Commission was doing look like? And then I'll wrap with some hard lessons. The chief reporter out of Perry, 1900, Dateline. I don't have a good Charles Brokaw voice. I grew up with Charles Brokaw, but you can imagine. Meeting of the Iowa Engineers Society. And one of the things that's mentioned in this publication is the Lewis Bill from 1900, noted as the Good Roads Bill. So we know the date line that we're after, right? That's 1904. But the first version of that legislation is as early as 1900, kind of setting the stage for what would become effectively the Highway Commission, the State Highway Commission, in the end, the Iowa DOT. A couple excerpts here, fast forward 1901. This is from the State Register, again, summarizing the Iowa Engineering Society meeting. And our president of note is no other than Professor Marsden. We'll spend some slides with him here in just a minute. Two things I wanted to point out. The Committee on Good Roads. Marsden is a member of that committee. The other thing that's a little different this time around is we now have a committee on legislation. So you can see the brewing impact and the direction, the savvy, if you will, of the Iowa Engineering Society as we snowball toward that important date. Fast forward again to 1903, and a lot of the information that I was able to collect for the background research for this focused on Iowa, but this is not Iowa focused, and I left this in really importantly. This is a summary from the Good Road Delegate meeting in Detroit, Michigan. And so not only is this across the nation, it's actually international. There's a Canadian connection here too. But what I want to emphasize with this slide is that what you're seeing take place is not exclusive to Iowa. There's other legislation attempting to get passed. Other states would be before Iowa. But you see a national movement towards the need to connect the local road system across the states. Actually, no, there's one more thing. Nope. Sorry, I want to mention this because I think this is important. Back to 1901. You didn't know you were going to time travel so much today, did you? That second article I left in largely because you can kind of sense the tone for that headline. Little advances made. The subtitle reading, only 20% of counties start permanent roads. So even by 1901, there's a little disdain for the progress that's not being made toward forming a statewide entity to organize the need for good engineered roads. Okay, back to 1903. This is definitely an opinion piece. This is not a summary from a meeting. There's two things I want to point out though. You can see the desire for the standardized road plans in that first quote, as well as a national government connection, a federal government connection. We wouldn't see that until 1916, but the desire is building and you can kind of see the momentum collecting. Somewhat humorous to those of us who might work in transportation today. A system of national highways would be a system of the best known to modern road builders. They would be expensive, but they would be permanent, and in the end, they would be cheap. If you follow our lettings, I'll let you decide if that was accurate or not. Okay, let's switch to Anson Marsden. Marsden, early in his career, you can see his graduation roots in Illinois. Initially is working for the railroad. When you put that in the context of railroad history and highway history, it's pretty fitting. But early in 1892, he joins the Iowa State College of Agriculture and Mechanical Arts as the civil engineering department head. Interestingly, he marries Alice that same year. Pretty good year for Professor Marsden. 1905, he is identified alongside Professor Curtis as the first commissioners for the Highway Commission. And he will go on to serve as department head. Dean officially retired in 1937, although he is very active well after 1937. That middle bullet is something I want to put some emphasis on. This is from Marsden's obituary, 1949. When the program was really getting underway, the Highway Commission, Dean Marsden took time out to serve with the engineers in World War I. If you take a look at the Marsden collection at the university, at Iowa State University, it is no secret that Marsden is not supportive of the conflict whatsoever. There's correspondence in there with he and family members. But I think this says a lot about Marston's leadership and how devoted he is. He knew that his abilities as an engineer could contribute and ultimately goes on to serve. Later, he would become the colonel of engineers in the 1920s. I don't mean to be controversial today, but this next statement might be a little controversial. It is very possible to talk about the it is not possible to talk about the Iowa Highway Commission without Professor Marston. It is possible to talk about Marston, noting that the Highway Commission is just a chapter. One of the really fun archives that is part of the Marston collection at Iowa State is this 1892 map of college grounds. And you can literally see Marston's hand-drawn red ink there of him sketching out what would become the water and sewerage system that served the university as it grew for decades and decades. Marston Tower is still at Iowa State, listed to the National Register, very tangible piece of the significant role that Marston played. In brief, you can see the clipping here from the Marshalltown Times-Republican, one of many examples of Marston's water and sewerage engineering around the state. You can kind of see a tally of the work he's done from flood control to waterworks. Later in his career, he would serve the Hoover Commission for the Panama and Nicaragua Canals, Mississippi River Review Board, as well as early BOR projects out in the West. This is a very small sample of the work he was doing, very broad-based. And when you mix in the work he does with his students later in life, it truly is immense. However, Marston is not a politician. Marston was not able to push the highway bill through. Oftentimes, House File 371 is accredited or known as the Jones Bill. Jones served the Oskaloosa area, was a practicing attorney. As we'll see in a couple slides, not to be outdone by Mr. Weeks, also an attorney serving the Guthrie Center area. And ultimately, the legislation would be approved by Governor Cummins. Cummins was our first three-term governor, known for his progressive connections, fighting monopolies and corruption, lowering tariffs. One of his legislative legacies is the Department of Agriculture. Interestingly, between Jones, Weeks, and Cummins, none of them really identify the Highway Commission as part of their legislative legacy. One of the truly fun archives to tease out as part of this project was this correspondence. At the time, in early 1904, Marston is being recruited, solicited, I think today we would call it headhunted, by University of Wisconsin-Madison. They wanted Marston very bad. So Professor Trudeau is interacting with Marston extensively. It's a very thick file in the Marston collection. And Marston notes, I mentioned earlier, like teasing out some of the interconnectivity. This was a really fun one in the sense that Marston probably has his fingerprints on that legislation, but here we see it in print. So Marston writing to Professor Trudeau, I shall have to be in Des Moines on legislative matters next Wednesday and Thursday, but plan to go to Madison on Friday if it satisfies you. What a cool little archive. Clearly, we can see that Marston is interacting with the legislature. Is he attending committee meetings? Is he meeting with Weeks? Is he meeting with Jones? Hard to say on those details, but we know that he's down there, down in Des Moines in early 1904. So January 29th is when we see the first version of the bill. This comes from the Des Moines Register and Leader. Interestingly, the first tenet of the bill is that the commissioner shall hold no other position under the laws of Iowa or a professorship. We know that that was not included in the final version of the bill. Interestingly, how that got there, maybe lost to history. The other elements of the legislation do persist. Investigate and devise best practices, confer with boards of supervisors, as well as prepare plans and specifications. So this is not the final bill. This was a piece that showed up in the register. Fast forward to March. This is the Weeks clipping that I mentioned earlier. So as on a flip to that last side, this article is largely quoting Weeks. The statement he provides is good roads are not possible without a state bureau and a scientist at its head. So recognizing the need for the science of engineering. A month ago, there was no professorship connected. That's changed. But uniquely, Weeks also goes on that he claimed credit for the measure, but he stated that there was no lobby backing of it, which we know is not true, right? The Engineering Society is supporting it. There's the Good Roads movement supporting it. It's legislation that has showed up time and again. Is this political wrangling? Is Weeks worried that 1904 is going to conclude like 1900 did without a passage of the bill? Hard to say, but a unique quote from what we can tell is an interesting character in Iowa's transportation history. Ultimately, as we noted when we started, the bill is approved in 1904, but here it's referred to as the Jones Bill. Again, this volley back and forth between Jones and Weeks. The bill to make the State Agricultural College, the Highway Commission, passed on its way to Cummins for approval. So a little bit of the context that led to what would become the Highway Commission in 1905. So what did those early years look like in brief? There's a lot you could do here. The first few years of the Highway Commission really are defined by testing, experimentation, working on construction methods, largely innovating what would become the commission. The commission is not letting contracts for construction like we think of the DOT today. It is largely advisory in its role in those early years. The first annual report does provide the legislation in its entirety. There's only 2 sections and a total of 4 clauses. It's very straightforward. The bill and the legislation would be changed, largely mapping onto and connecting with some of the federal legislation in 1913, 1917, 1925, and 1927. First annual report, I think it's pretty telling that this is largely being written by Thomas McDonald, a new student of Professor Marston, who would go on to have an exceptional career impacting the nation when it comes to transportation. But even in that first year, they note, our future work will be seriously crippled unless there are larger funds placed at our disposal. So that 1904 bill had $7,000 associated that would go to what would become Iowa State, $3,500 per year. That $7,000 covered 2 years. That was effectively Thomas McDonald's salary. McDonald is quantifying what's going on in the state pretty heavily, noting that in 1905, there's over $4 million in contracts let for transportation. You see a lot of early support for the county engineer system we have today. And one of the real action items that the commission is taking in those first few years are road schools. This is the third annual report, so this would be 1907. In 1907, the road school went to Council Bluffs as well as to Waterloo. These are really well received locally, and I threw this photo in as a good reminder that this is definitely pre-automobile. Horseless carriage is taking off around this time, but all of the contracting work that's being done is horse-drawn. There's no doubt about that element of the early days of the Highway Commission. Shifting to some of the hard lessons. 1905, there's less than 1,000 horseless carriages in the state of Iowa. Within 10 years, there's over 100, almost 150,000 automobiles. So when you think about the early years of the Highway Commission, one of the things that they're trying to wrangle, to manage, to engineer for, is this boom in transportation that is the automobile. Alongside some of the challenges with the automobile are just the day-to-day work that comes alongside managing Iowa's oftentimes difficult hydrology. So a lot of the experimentation does result in failure, but it leads to the system that would become the transportation connections that we know today. Sadly, Iowa's first fatality noted up in Franklin County in 1905. Unfortunately, this is that technology that is the automobile pairing with this state agency that's in its infancy. So when you think about the challenges that were laid ahead for the commission, you can't separate that from the early days of the automobile and some of the realities that came with speeding and learning to design roads safer for the vehicle. I just came across this last week. Typically, when you look at our fatality numbers, we date those back to 1925. I believe this photo to be from the 1927 State Fair. And on here, you can see the Highway Commission is tracking fatalities as early as 1916. So one of the keys that leads to the Highway Commission's success is their ability to adapt. And that largely means adapting to the automobile. Certainly outside of the period of 1905, 1904, 1905, sadly, Professor Marston is killed in a car accident in 1949. He's traveling west of Tama with his brother, who also worked for the Highway Commission. They had just visited their family farm in Illinois. Conditions aren't great. He's thrown from the vehicle and dies instantly. So to wrap up, testing, exploration, education, and outreach, and largely innovation define the first 5 years of the Iowa Highway Commission. The commission was able to persist because of their ability to adapt. Think about the horse-drawn grader that you see in the photo, as opposed to nearly 150,000 automobiles in the state 10 years later. Professor Marston's leadership, as we saw with his connection to World War I, is incredibly devoted. And we also see that in Thomas McDonald, who would succeed Marston in the early years of the Highway Commission. Again, I want to thank you for joining us on our road trip series. And I want to especially acknowledge the Iowa State Special Collections and University Archives. The Marston collection is terrific. Thank you.
Thank you, Brennan. Our next speaker is Ray Werner. He's a lifelong Iowan living in Dubuque with his family. He has a BA in history from Loras College, Catholic boy, and an MA in history from the University of Northern Iowa. Ray began his tallgrass career as a seasonal field tech during undergraduate and graduate work. After graduate school, he became the curator and assistant director of the Galena, Illinois Historical Society and Museum, where he served for over 5 years before then returning to tallgrass as a research historian. Since 2022, Ray has been a partner and a principal investigator conducting Section 106 studies and other historical and architectural projects. Let's welcome Ray.
So Brennan's presentation was the perfect setup for this, which is further exploration of the Good Roads movement, which is sort of the civilian grassroots organizational side, less of state commission and governmental side, although there's definitely a lot of overlap there. But what we'll be looking at are 3 examples of good roads organizations in Iowa, and we'll learn a little bit about how they came to be. To begin here, I'll start with just a quick little quote from Ingalls' Highways of Iowa book. He says, "For the automobiles, in a sense, the frontier reopened. The history of motoring seems to glory in the mud, holes, and hazards. The auto has its own frontier, and travel was compared to a sporting trip. The auto frontier quickly began to end rural isolation, and as affordability of automobiles increased, so did the need for better roads." And so, as Brennan said, the automobile numbers in Iowa increased from just about 1,000 in 1905 to 150,000 or so in just a matter of a decade. And what we see is that presented some challenges for folks. We had, in rural areas, primarily dirt, mud roads, very little gravel. Pavement was really only in the cities in these early years of automobiles in Iowa. And there were matters of safety, there were matters of water drainage and keeping the roads clear, and there was just a matter of marking roads so that people could get from one city to another. And people who were interested in improving these challenges formed local organizations. Oftentimes they were under the umbrella of a local chamber of commerce or a local commercial club, because they saw these roads as eventually bringing people to their cities and towns. If they could draw in more tourists, more commerce, that would bring more dollars into their cities. And so that was the impetus for a lot of them. So here today, I will run through 3 different levels of good roads movements. really they're just examples. And the first one is the Lincoln Highway Association, which I know a lot of you know a lot about. And in the interest of time, I'll run through that very briefly, but it is foundational to the other two examples that I want to talk about. The challenge for the first one will be creating a coast-to-coast automobile highway for folks, and that ultimately became the Lincoln Highway. The second one is more of a regional example within Iowa, which was creating a connection up to the northwest from Sioux City south to Denison, where it then was able to connect up with the Lincoln Highway. And the promoters of this northwest route, the Sioux City Denison cutoff, as it was called, even considered it really an extension of the Lincoln Highway. And for me, looking back on that now, I'm wondering if that was maybe a little bit of a reach, but for them, it was great promotion, and it helped to bring people who were maybe traveling on the Lincoln Highway up to their communities. And the third one is a really local project that I had the pleasure to study up in Dubuque County, and we'll talk about that at the end. So as you can see here, this in red outlines roughly the Lincoln Highway's route through Iowa as it came to be, and this will be the first example that we will run through here. The idea for a coast-to-coast highway came about in 1912 by a man named Carl Fisher. He was the leader of the group that did the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, the Indianapolis 500, and he had this vision for a gravel route that would cross from Atlantic to Pacific, much like the Transcontinental Railroad. And he tried to bring in other auto manufacturers and industrialists to help support that movement and create an organization that could make that a reality. One of the folks he brought in was Henry Joy, and Henry Joy was president of the Packard Motor Company, and he extended this vision. I believe he is credited with bringing up the name the Lincoln Highway to garner public support and sort of sense of patriotism to the project that would help promote it and market it. And he also was the one who brought about the idea of making it a paved route, not just gravel. And so he really advanced that vision. And the way they did this was creating a national level board, the Lincoln Highway Association Board, and then little state groups called consuls that they would pass information to and from and sort of delegate with. And then under them were county or district level consuls who would coordinate more specific activities at the local level. And by example, at the local level, we have two men here who were involved with a Lynn County district level consul group. The first was W.G. Haskell. He was by trade a wood and coal dealer, but he also served in the Iowa Senate. And he was one of the movers or shakers to really help organize locally and to help promote the idea. The other one was Edward Killian, who had a department store with his brother in Cedar Rapids. And they helped organize folks to promote the idea, market it, and help outline where this route would eventually go. And so if you think back to the structure with the national board, state boards, and lower boards, the national level board would pass down magazines that the local groups could hand out to promote this to either the local population, to local boards of supervisors. They were also handing out film strips to help promote the idea. But what they really needed was what I would call a display model. They needed something physical that people could see and use and touch and promote the idea. And so the states built seedling miles. And these two gentlemen in Lynn County helped put together Iowa's Seedling Mile, which is near Cedar Rapids and Mount Vernon, and to help market the idea. But that's just an example I wanted to give you to help show that these were public organizations, or not public organizations, but these were groups from the public organizing to help make this a reality. And this is a very broad scope example, but then as we go through the other examples, maybe you'll see how they reflect that method as well. And it also shows that even though this association type of highway was made obsolete by the federalization of highways, Lincoln Highway was ultimately replaced by US 30, as you know, even though that association style of highway has come and gone, its fingerprints are still all over the state today. Our example of a regional challenge was connecting Sioux City to Denison. And by getting to Denison, you could access the Lincoln Highway, which was done by an existing road that weaved through different small towns, and it was dirt and it was messy, and they weren't just looking to increase traffic, but they wanted to help maintain it. And you'll see that there were several folks involved with that. And the time frame we're looking at is really about 1914 to 1917. Back before the Good Roads Association locally was formed to create the Sioux City Denison cutoff, there was a group in Sioux City who founded a raceway, and they wanted to promote and market their big race in Sioux City. And with shades of Fisher and his Indianapolis Motor Speedway, they thought that they could help promote it by getting a road down to the Lincoln Highway, and that would help draw people up. And so they did that. They formed a group that went out and filled in ruts, graded the roads, and they marked white and green bands around the telegraph poles. And that was in 1914. And they said, this is the best road into Sioux City, and any motorist who's coming to Sioux City will want to use this road. And they put that in publications throughout the state. And then in 1917, a committee of people got together and said, it's been 3 years since anybody has done anything with this complicated network of roads down to Denison. We could really make that better. And so in 1917, they formed the Sioux City Denison Cutoff Association. And there were a lot of local supporters in Sioux City, including some council members and some others, but they had representation from all the small towns along the way: Smithland, Hornick, Mapleton, Denison, Charter Oak, and others there. And so what they did is they formed a group and said we'd collect dues to help repair the roads, and they did. They went and they filled in ruts, filled in the potholes along the way, and they came up with a new marker for the diagonal highway. Was a red square with white fill and then the blue diagonal. And that's what they painted onto the telegraph poles to help direct people along this route. And one thing they did that I thought was especially interesting is that the folks in Sioux City started painting the poles down the road. And they said to each other, make sure that you also have enough paint to give to the people in the next town, and tell them to make sure that they have enough paint to give to the people in the next town, so that they wouldn't have an excuse not to continue painting the poles. Give them all the resources necessary and make sure they continue the job. Something else that I think is interesting is that a lot of these people were working for the betterment of local commerce to increase business in their communities. And I think also personally as well, as you look at this group as well as others across the state, a lot of them have auto repair shops or they own car dealerships or oil distributors. So they might have some sort of vested interest in it that way as well. Ultimately, the State Highway Commission agreed to incorporate this as a highway for the state, and even at that time, it wasn't yet all maintained. In 1929, there were still portions that were either gravel or dirt. And in 1929, there was a bond referendum that passed to complete the coverage of the road all the way to Denison. And by doing so, also connecting it to the Lincoln Highway. Another thing that they really pushed for was safety. And that included making good river crossings and having good drainage and culverts for the road. But it also meant eventually straightening alignments. And sometimes that meant bypassing older routes. And it also meant moving, in some cases, the roads off from railroad crossings. And so in that 1929 proposal, that was a big part of that program as well, creating safety for the roads, for the road, by moving it away from railroad crossings. And I don't know, I think the diagonal roads in Iowa are really special. and this is one of the more important ones. So to our third example, this is in Dubuque County with the old Dyersville to Worthington Road. And I'll address the challenge here in just a second, but you can see here in red, just a short little road there, but it took a lot of work from the local Good Roads Association, primarily out of Dyersville, to make this happen. And since I assume you might not be too familiar with the road, here are some photographs of the road. I got familiar with this road through a project that was a historic mitigation project during the deconstruction of this bridge here, just a little concrete bridge, but it was recommended eligible for the National Register. And so because they needed to take it out, we did some mitigation and a documentation of the bridge and a study. And so if I'm talking about the road and I slip into talking about the bridge, please forgive me. But here on the left is the 1875 Andreas Atlas of Iowa map. And I have highlighted in blue what was the Worthington Road, or the Dyersville to Worthington Road. And we have, luckily, a newspaper clipping from the early 1900s that gave legal descriptions of where this road went. So we were able to track it. And even as far back as 1875, there was a path or a route there. And the bridge is there at the red point. So the challenge that they really needed to address was that for folks in or passing through Western Dubuque County, and really also Eastern Delaware County, there was no good north-south route. And I'll point to you here. Through there, and then up to points along the Mississippi River and beyond. Unless you wanted to go diagonally over to Dubuque and then dogleg your way back around kind of north, you could get there. Or if you were headed over to Cedar Rapids, you could go north from there. But there was no good north-south route for the people locally. And so a subcommittee was formed in the Dyersville Commercial Club that said, let's study this a little bit more, and maybe we can put together a good roads movement and talk to the County Board of Supervisors, talk to the State Highway Commission, and eventually get something going here. And the first thing they did in about 1917 was count the number of cars that passed over this Dyersville-Worthington Road. And in 1 week, and they would point out time and time again, it was a stormy week. So people might not want to be traveling to begin with. And also that's a terrible time to be a dirt road. They counted over 700 vehicles passing on that road in that week, in that stormy week. And they noted that a lot of them were heavy trucks. And so there was poor drainage, the road was bad. This to them was evidence enough that they needed a better road here. So under the umbrella of the Dyersville Commercial Club, they put together a good roads movement. They politicked with the County Board of Supervisors. They talked to county engineers. And these two gentlemen were really the movers and the shakers in the group. They actually went and presented to the State Highway Commission a couple times to eventually get funding for the project. But Jacob Friedman, the man on the left, was a banker, I believe, and he was located in Worthington, which is kind of at the south end of the road. And then Joseph Kuhn, he was a auto dealer in Dyersville as well. So just like with other areas and other levels of the movement, you can see why maybe they had personal investment in it as well. And in the end, their work paid off. All of their presentations to commissions and boards ultimately resulted in improvements for the road, which included culverts and the bridge that I love so very, very much. One article I felt was pretty telling and a little funny in a way. It said that bridges constructed on the highway are of a new type, as recommended by the Iowa State Highway Commission. And those living on the road have just reason to be proud of them. Then, too, the culverts follow along new lines that tend toward enhancement of natural beauty to be seen along the highway. And the funny part to me is that it would spell permanence for all time. But the County Board of Supervisors secured the funding to design this bridge. The Dubuque County engineers had a proprietary concrete spindle that they designed. And if you look at others around the state, it's really similar. But they had their molds and they wanted to use them. So that was okay. And one of the folks at the State Highway Commission, the chief bridge engineer, E.W. Blumenschein, was ultimately the man who would approve those plans for the bridges, including this one. And here's just a collection of interesting maps. The one on the top right is out of the Des Moines Register and is actually riddled with errors, although it does show our road in question. But this was great. The road had culverts, it had a new concrete bridge that was nice and modern, and that was in 1927. In 1928, the road was graveled using local stone that was quarried just 100 meters away from the road. It was great, and it wasn't enough. The Good Roads Association there in Dyersville kept pushing for more. They thought it could be straightened in some areas. That would improve safety as well as speed to get from point A to point B. And so they kept pushing for more. And ultimately, the State Highway Commission said, all right, we'll build a new highway along a different alignment. And so here on the right, the red dotted line shows the old Worthington Road where they had been pushing for so long to get all of these improvements. But then you can see Highway 136, which was originally 188, but Highway 136 is the new alignment. And as you can see, it's nice and straight, which is good for safety and speed. It was concrete. It had wonderful drainage. It was a thoroughly modern road, and it was built already by 1933. So less than 5 years after the initial improvements for the old Worthington Road. And so the irony to me is that the folks doing all of this work to improve the road and, in my mind, build this bridge was also the same people and the same work that replaced it and made the old bridge obsolete. And what can we learn from the Good Roads movement and all of these folks who are working across the state of Iowa on numerous projects just like this? Well, we can learn about the early history of the automobile in Iowa and how people used them for purposes of commerce, tourism, and other local functions. We can learn about the importance of roadway maintenance and all the related costs. We can learn the stories of the engineers and the science behind the work. We can learn about the builders and the folks who used these roads and bridges. But in bold here at the bottom, we'll say that the importance of the Good Roads movement we can learn about and how individuals worked and politicked to give us a foundation of good drivable roads. These weren't necessarily people politicking in legislatures or in elections and things like that. These were people who were schmoozing with their neighbors, fundraising to fill potholes. They were networking and organizing to help make better roads a reality at a time when there were still few good roads in the state. And we can learn a little bit about the notion that some things around us may seem trivial. We may use the same road and same bridge every day. We may not think about it, but without the work of these folks, those trivial things might have been completely different and affected our lives in some way. And ultimately, their fingerprints are still all over the state. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. Emily, that was a pretty strong argument to add a loop to the Lincoln Highway, or rather a diagonal. Our next speaker is Libby Wielenga. She is an Iowa-based architectural historian and founder of Historical Link LLC. She specializes in historic preservation and cultural resource documentation, with experience ranging from individual properties to statewide studies. Her recent work includes contributions to a comprehensive study of historic bridges, highlighting the role of infrastructure in Iowa's development. Welcome, Libby.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here. I also want to thank the America 250 Committee for inviting me to speak today, as well as the other gentlemen that spoke before me. They laid a very nice foundation for what I will be sharing with you today. So building on what they shared, I want to focus on how some of these early trails, the policies and organizations that have been in place really turned into innovation for Iowa. In particular, how Iowa used bridges and culverts to solve transportation challenges in our rural landscape, and really how those solutions influenced different practices even beyond our state. As we approach America's 250th anniversary, we're often asked to reflect on our history. One way to do that is by looking at our systems that connect us, like transportation. In Iowa, those systems were shaped by our rural landscape. Also our, agricultural economy and the need to cross thousands, really tens of thousands of waterways. The result was a series of practical, economical, and scalable solutions. These innovations not only worked here, but helped really shape transportation more broadly. So today I'm just going to highlight a very few of Iowa's transportation innovations that focused on bridges and how they reflect the larger American story of problem solving. So one of the more unique challenges of Iowa roadways isn't just the distance, it's the numerous, we'll say, interruptions. The fact that Iowa's landscape is frequently divided by water, rivers, streams, extensive drainage systems, and many of those systems are man-made, really beginning soon after the settlement period and extending well into the 20th century, largely to support our ag system. Every one of these crossings, whether natural or man-made, required infrastructure if you wanted to stay dry. What started with horse and wagon crossings quickly shifted to early trucks, bringing more weight, more stress, and a greater demand on these structures. In Iowa, transportation included not only those large river crossings that we think about, but the tens of thousands of smaller bridges, smaller culverts that really needed to be built in order to move across their state. And the people building them had to consider the different material choices. Each early material used for bridges had both benefits and limitations. To put it simply, and I'm going to make this very simple. The engineers in our audience might have more to add, but timber was accessible at the time. It was abundant during early settlement period, but it really lacked that long-term durability. And over time, deforestation in our state became a big issue. Stone was durable, but it required significant construction and skilled labor to build them. Different metals were very effective, but they were expensive to use everywhere. So while each material worked in specific situations, none of them provided a solution that could really be applied broadly. Engineers were interested in finding a material that would be economical and durable for use across our state. Railroads and roadways faced similar problems, but under very different conditions. Railroads were private companies operated on fixed, very carefully designed routes, right? So they invested heavily and they could have fewer but more durable bridges. Roadways and our highways needed far more crossings. They needed to be built for the current local needs. So while railroads set the stage for bridge construction, roadway engineers really had to find a different solution. One material that railroads used infrequently, but that roadway bridge engineers increasingly experimented with was concrete. Concrete itself wasn't new. However, it was known to have some critical limitations. While it performed well in compression, it failed under tension. And both were needed for bridge construction. So by the late 19th century, engineers realized the solution for concrete was to add reinforcements. By embedding metal within the concrete, each material could do what it did best. The metal carried the tension and the concrete carried the compression. Now, compared to timber, it lasted far longer and it was less susceptible to fire and decay. Importantly for engineers at the time, they saw it could be repeated at a much lower cost than, let's say, an all-metal bridge. This made it possible to be well suited for more of Iowa's roadways. And that set us up for one of the earliest and most important applications of reinforced concrete in the United States. And it happened right here in Iowa. Engineers were working on reinforced concrete during the latter half of the 19th century. And as one of the earliest reinforced concrete systems, it was developed in Europe, actually, by Austrian engineer Joseph Mellin. His patent was completed in 1892. His concept was straightforward: embedded metal within concrete and to let each material do what it did best. What made the Mellin system distinct was that it relied on full iron members and beams, really over beams and ribbed arches, really focused to carry that load that was needed while encasing it in concrete. So structurally, this early design behaved more essentially like a steel bridge, just encased in concrete. But rather than a concrete bridge embedded with metal, that distinction would come later. The important design for him eliminated the need for expensive timber scaffolding during the construction of a concrete bridge, so it was a cost-saving measure. His system, while invented and patented, still needed to be proven in the United States to be able to take advantage of that market. Its strongest advocate was a fellow Austrian engineer, Friedrich von Imperger, and he made that happen. In 1893, Frederick designed this small Mellin system bridge that you see here. Originally, it was placed over Dry Run Creek near Rock Rapids in Lyon County, which is in far northwest Iowa. This was the first of this form of this Mellin system in the United States. The span, as it's pictured here, is just 30 feet long, very short, 16 feet wide. It features an elliptical arch It has 5 embedded steel beams. And then you can see it's faced with, it's actually Sioux Falls jasper. While it was originally built for the rural crossing, in 1964, it was relocated to this park that you see here in Rock Rapids. Once it was proven in Iowa, the design and material combination saw a widespread use in highway bridges across the country, and this was the first. So with reinforced concrete validated in practice, particularly this design, the next challenge became how to design it efficiently and to apply it at scale. And this is where Iowa contributes one of its most recognizable and innovative bridge designs, the Marsh Rainbow Arch. Earlier, we saw how materials had an innovation of materials and also how to make concrete work structurally and how Iowa helped prove it. Here, the innovation is the specific design itself, and really how the structure was used by engineers to solve their challenges. While numerous engineers in Europe and the United States had been working on engineering reinforcement, similar to the Mellon system that we talked about, they also patented them. In 1911, an Iowa engineer named James Marsh patented a new and innovative design of reinforced concrete. What makes his design versus all the other patented reinforced concrete designs was its form. While those early arches, like the Mellon system we just talked about, carried the deck from below, Marsh flipped the system, suspending the roadway from above. So as you can see, the picture on the top shows his 1911 patented design, where the arch rises above the roadway, creating that rainbow shape, while the deck itself is suspended below it. The Marsh arch carries load in compression, while the hangers and the floor system carry the tension, creating that necessary hybrid system for the bridge to function using concrete. In fact, this design improves the performance of reinforced concrete, actually allowing it to perform at its best with the compression. And this design requires less structural steel than Mellon's, which of course then means less cost. It worked well for moderate spans, it could be repeated, and it fits that need for rural routes. The picture shown at the bottom is actually still in place. It's the Beaver Creek Bridge in Boone County, if anyone is familiar with that. It was constructed by the Marsh and Son Construction Company, which of course is a relative of James Marsh and had to use his relative's patent in order to complete the bridge construction. But the bridge is a single span. You'll see it has one opening. It's 50 feet long, which is a significant span length for the design at the time. And it, like I said, it still maintains that rural road. So what's notable about the Marsh Arch Bridge isn't just the design, it's what the design allowed those Iowa officials to do. This design in the Marsh Arch offered counties and state officials a specialized and repeatable design that was more durable than timber and often a lower cost than an all-steel bridge, particularly a steel truss bridge. But it also provided a nice aesthetic appearance. Pictured here, if you can see it very well, it's kind of dark, is a 3-span Marsh Arch Bridge in Lake City. They call it the Lake City Bridge there in Calhoun County. It spans the North Raccoon River. It's about 271 feet long, but it is important because it demonstrated early on to engineers and county officials that the design could scale beyond just those smaller rural crossings, that it could be completed on those larger, more complicated sites, typically saved for those all-truss, steel truss bridges. So for reinforced concrete, we have the Mellon form that was first tested in Iowa, and then Marsh's design helped to kind of promote and scale it. So that's important, but the success of those elements also kind of created some new challenges. By the 1900s, Marsh had his design and then his patent. He was promoting it in Iowa and across the Midwest. But at the same time, there were numerous other reinforced concrete bridge patents occurring and designing also spread in Iowa and across the Midwest. So there were so many design options for reinforced concrete bridges. as well as the usual timber bridges. We had all steel bridges, there were beam bridges. I mean, there were countless options for an engineer to need to decide, or for a local official to need to decide what would be the best option for their crossing. Even after the turn of the century, as discussed with some of the previous talks today, for transportation and transportation decisions, like which bridge to build, they were really still made at that local level. The local officials could choose among patented designs. Like I mentioned, the reinforced concrete designs, a plethora of them, metal truss forms, a plethora of those. They could work with an established steel bridge company. They could use their own local design. There were numerous options to choose from. So that meant different materials, different designs, far different approaches to construction. So now I will mention the variety wasn't all that bad. It encouraged experimentation, it encouraged new ideas, but that also led to a lot of inconsistency in performance, in quality, and as the official expertise at the time, pre-1913, was not required or really verified, it made it difficult to manage bridges as a growing roadway system. I should say at the same time, as previously mentioned with the other talks, that transportation demands were really increasing. And after 1900, automobile and truck traffic really began to rise significantly. So even as individual bridges improved, the overall system really became difficult to manage, which does not fit well with this period that we're in, the progressive era, circa 1890 to 1920s, where efficiency, standardization were really important priorities. And this is where Iowa's transportation innovations takes on a new path. It's not a new material, it's not a new bridge type. The innovation was standardization. After decades of variation, different materials, different designs, different outcomes, the priority for Iowa was not more ideas, it was for consistency. In 1913, with the creation, and I should say reorganization, of the Iowa Highway Commission, that shift really became happening in a meaningful way. With the new legislation in place, county engineers are officially formalized, and they have centralized oversight with the Iowa Highway Commission. At that point, it's established. Where Brennan talked about 1904 being the initial part of the Iowa Highway Commission, and that was focused more on education. By 1913, with new legislation, that gave the Iowa Highway Commission some teeth, some authority, and they ran with that, and that included this standardization. So for Iowa, bridge design was able to move from that local decision-making to more of a coordinated statewide system, which was particularly helpful for those designated highway routes. Instead of every county developing its own solution, standardized plans began to emerge. Designs became repeatable, specifications became more consistent, and that allowed bridges to be built more efficiently and safer and really at scale, which is what we needed. Now, I should say Iowa was not doing this in a vacuum. However, Iowa implemented standardized plans early. The Iowa Highway Commission applied it systematically, and over time, proved it to other states that it would work statewide. By the 1920s, similar standardized bridge plans were being used across the Midwest. States like Minnesota, Illinois, and Nebraska had adopted comparable plans. Standardization allowed Iowa to build a system that was consistent, repeatable, and scalable across tens of thousands of crossings. As agriculture evolved, demands increased, as you can imagine. But the response wasn't always replacement. Instead, Iowa emphasized bridge widening as one of the states to apply it early. Iowa was. They applied it consistently, and the goal was really to reduce costs and to keep those roadways open. This is Iowa pragmatism in action, not just innovation in design, but in applying solutions statewide. That approach sets the stage for what Iowa tested next. I should mention that, as we know, not every innovation in Iowa pursued became standardized. And really, that's part of our story. This is a different kind of innovation, a simple experimentation. In 1958, Iowa built a welded aluminum girder highway bridge in the Des Moines area. It is and was the first of its kind in the world and the first all aluminum highway bridge in the United States. Pictured here during the construction period and on the far side once it was placed into service. The bridge was designed by Ned Ashton, an extremely notable bridge engineer of the 20th century. The bridge originally carried 86th Street over what would become I-35, I-80. That would not occur until the mid-1960s when that designation and the route of the interstate system would pass underneath this bridge. But the bridge, or the idea of the bridge, was really straightforward. Aluminum is lighter than steel. It resists corrosion and it offers the potential for lower maintenance. And as a result, overall lower costs than steel. But the lower costs in steel were really part of its time because it was post-World War II. Steel costs were still really high and availability was extremely low. So the successful combination, which is the notable part of this structural aluminum and welding, it really was unprecedented at the time for aluminum bridges. But I should mention that ultimately the material costs and this type of design were just too high, particularly once the steel prices came down and, of course, compared to reinforced concrete. As a result, it was not practical to use statewide. In 1994, although the bridge retained the necessary structural integrity, it was replaced with a larger structure to accommodate increased traffic in along 86th Street. So I have to say, innovation in Iowa transportation isn't just about what works. It's about what can be tested, new ideas, different conditions, just to see what comes next and to see how it can create our value. That value for Iowa came from a series of innovations. And we had we had just had time for today for just a few to talk about. Reinforced concrete, patented designs, standardization, experimentation. But each one responded to a real need and provided value to Iowa's transportation system. Not every idea lasts, but each one improved what worked. And that process, the testing, applying, and refining those solutions created real value and built Iowa's transportation system. And what we see in Iowa is not isolated at all. It's reflected in the broader American pattern. As we approach America's 250th anniversary, it's worth recognizing how much of our infrastructure was actually built this way. Not just through big ideas, although there are those, but through practical, innovative solutions developed and implemented in places like Iowa. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Angie Poole. I'm the Director of Location and Environment at the Department of Transportation. And I just want to recognize our speakers today. So if those speakers can come up here on the stage, I have something to give to you. Sorry about that. Okay, and I just want to thank you for all your efforts today and to let you know that the Iowa DOT appreciates your research, your analysis, and your interpretation of these significant transportation histories to help illuminate these topics for Iowans. The Iowa America 250 Committee proudly recognizes you and your efforts. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.